Hi, this is Ron Singer. I'll be reading from The Promised End, a collection of stories about midlife, old age, and the thereafter. It's published by Unsolicited Press in December 2019. First, I'll read from a story called Running the Diagonal. I'll read the opening of it. Well, I whispered to Lou, he did have a drop-dead drop shot. Very funny, Jake, he whispered back. Lou is Louis M. Gordon, a detective sergeant supervisor in the New York City Police Department. 30 years ago, he was a student in my senior English honors class. Mr. Jacobs I was in those days. My actual name is Jerome, no middle initial, Jacobs, nicknamed Jake, not Jerry. Lou and I go way back. The late James Jumbo Thurston had dropped dead of a heart attack while gardening. The minister had run through his tropes. American dream, immigrant from South Africa. Family man, married, one child. Work, highly successful. Fitness, committed squash player. Irony of death, so young, blah, blah, blah. Lou claims I taught him both to write and to stop horsing around. He once said that if not for me, he might have wound up a dead junkie or an insurance salesman. From time to time, he still has me eyeball a few things he has to write, like evidence reports. Even so, he was doing me a big favor by accompanying me to the funeral. Lou ranks high enough in the NYPD that he must have a perfect grasp of the calculus of the IOU, or as people in public life say, I owe you. Like most of the other men present, we were wearing dark, lightweight suits and tasteful ties. We were marooned for the moment on a little island in the middle of the lavish country club reception following the cremation. This was all taking place in Great Neck, a posh North Shore suburb just across the New York City line. Or as Jumbo would put it, location, location. Always go to the T, Jacobs. Prime real estate. And he would suit the action to the word, slamming his hip into me so hard that I would find myself 2 feet to the right of the T, whereupon he would feather a drop-dead drop shot into the front left corner, which, run as I might, I could not retrieve. Jumbo was, in short, a prick, which was related to my reason for asking Lou Gordon to accompany me to today's obsequies for the deceased, or as Mark Twain put it, orgies for the diseased. After introducing ourselves to the widow Thurston, who looked more worried than sorrowful, was she toting up putative bequests? Lou and I were back on our island. I was uncomfortably aware that I was making him waste half a day during the week in which he was busy with, among other things, a horrific drive-by shooting in the Bronx, which was attracting all kinds of unwelcome attention, including mayoral. Consummate gentleman that he is, Lou had already relieved me of this burden. Not to worry, Jake. I don't mind getting out of the kitchen for a few hours. If God is watching, by the time I get back, my guys may have someone in custody. He hadn't even asked why I had invited him. In 40 years of teaching, maybe I had discussed too many books with too many students. When you're trying to fill up one of those long classes that can't seem to catch fire, you find yourself falling into what I call the post-post school of lit crit, i.e. anything goes. Let's say a student who seldom speaks pipes up with an idea on the approximate level of fake news. Wordsworth really loved nature, right, Mr. J? If truth were the game, I would have disabused her of the notion that fairness requires equal time for all views, a notion dear to many adolescent minds. Ergo, this habit of multiple truths, let's be polite, may have been an indirect reason for Lou's presence. To get to the point, I could not entirely swallow the accepted truth about Jumbo's death. After reading the notice in the Times the other day, massive cardiac infarction, one of my first reactions was to suspect foul play, so I decided to seek a second opinion. Speaking of multiple truths, there may also be a second opinion regarding my morbid hypothesis. Since over the years in which we had played squash, I had resisted many urges to hurry this man toward his afterlife, could I have been projecting my own deep and dark desires, Macbeth? For example, at the end of an especially contentious game a few months ago, I had stalked off the court, muttering imprecations that may have included, "Fuck you, drop dead, you fucking son of a bitch. Tisk, tisk, temper," he taunted. Jumbo's victory in that particular game had had the earmarks of a hostile takeover, which was among his off-court endeavors as an M&A specialist. The game still sticks in my craw. Even now I can smell the cigarette smoke on the ginger-haired little bastard's breath. To get back to the facts, as reported by our national paper of record, and fleshed out by gossip. On a hot and humid Saturday afternoon in July, after 2 hours of morning squash, followed by a heavy lunch, this fit man of 56 was felled by a massive heart attack. Like Marlon Brando in The Godfather, Part 1, Jumbo Thurston dropped dead in his own garden. On the drive back to the city, since Lou still hadn't asked, I decided to take the initiative. Because he was scrupulous about not using NYPD vehicles for personal travel, I was driving. Realizing how silly and trite my suspicions sounded, even to myself, I broached them indirectly, under the guise of revisiting the minister's remarks. I also assumed the facetious tone left over from my teaching days, which ended in retirement 6 years ago. I wonder if you caught the undertone of the eulogy. Undertone what? Lou had been lost in his own thoughts. Well, wasn't the undertone, as you call it, what it always is? A bunch of cliches papering over the dead guy's faults? You already told me you never liked him. Not to put too fine a point on it, but he was a prick. As we approached the merger with the Van Wyck, we got stuck in traffic, which always happens on the Long Island Expressway. 1 minute you're sailing along, the next it's stop and go, and stop. When I'd asked Lou about this on the way out, he'd made one of his dry riposts. Why ask me? I never drew traffic duty. Don't mind, Lou, I said. Now I'll explain why I called him that by going back to the eulogy. Why not? I bet this will be like one of your crazy lit crit riffs. I always enjoyed those, Jake. Let's take it point by point. Respect the text. Yup, here we go. The traffic had eased, but that was not what I meant. Number 1, family first. Yeah, right. Husband, father, Indian chief. I don't think so. When we played squash all those times, he'd brag about how many hours he also logged at the grind, his job. You're talking to a cop, Jake. You know what our divorce rates are like? And do you know the principal cause? Lou said this, knowing that I knew he was an exception. Jessica, his first and only wife, is a lawyer who works with the homeless, and they have 2 normal, whatever that means, daughters, both in their teens. I kept hammering at point number 1. Plus, most Saturday mornings, he would take the train in for, okay, I get the idea. You know, if you had one flaw as a teacher, Jake, it was that when you were on a roll, you couldn't stop. Actually, I think you once acknowledged as much when we were reading Othello. Remember? In the middle of one of your monologues, the passing bell rang. We'd been discussing the drinking scene where Iago causes chaos. A bell rings and he says something like, "Time flies when you're having fun." You ended class by repeating that line. Instead of providing the exact quotation, I said, "You always had a good memory, Lou." Point number 2. universally respected by colleagues. Actually, over the years, Jumbo often bragged about that. Early on, he was a financial advisor to preferred clients, which meant, as I recall, 10 million and up. Lou interrupted. Jess and I keep our own fortune, which is closer to 10,000 in an index fund. That's because we read that in the long run. I finished the sentence. Financial advisors seldom beat the market, but they always collect the vig. You said early on, Jake, after that, Lou was obviously interested in money. Who isn't? I think he became a takeover specialist, but he never went into the details. Since he was normally such a braggart, I always assumed he worked along the border of legality, or south of the border. Lou nodded. Jess talks a lot about that. One reason she left a lucrative practice of corporate law was that stench of dirty money. But get to the point, Jake. We're close to the tunnel. So far, not many surprises. I'm afraid this may not be one of your better efforts. Lou, my feelings are hurt. He shrugged. Then we hit another traffic jam, a big one this time. At least the gods were not tired of listening. Point number 3 is where this gets really good. Remember when the minister waxed elephant about the American dream, about how Jumbo, a native of South Africa, arrived on our shores 2 decades ago? Well, never mind the inaccuracy of that statement. He was certainly never a native, either before or after the advent of majority rule in 1994, the year before he cleared out. There's something else. Another guy I play with at a different club, a grad student in philosophy from Johannesburg. As I'm sure you know, they call the place Joburg, or Joey's, Lou added. I was there for a conference in 2012. Good steak. Anyway, this guy told me a story that was all over their press in the 90s. Guess what? I remember that ploy, Jake, a hoary but goodie. In the middle of a lecture, you direct the question to the student who is paying least attention. Remember the time you did it? I think we were studying Huck Finn to Harvey Grunwald when he was sleeping. We all howled. Did you ever hear what happened to Harvey, I asked? I haven't seen him at any of the reunions. Speak, memory. Didn't he drop out in the middle of senior year? Actually, he was caught shoplifting for the 3rd time, and it turned out he had a serious drug problem. His parents shipped him off to a private clinic in Texas. The headmaster called a special meeting with our class and fed us a bullshit story about how the family had moved. I wonder why he never told us that story. I welcomed this excursus into crimes and misdemeanors. Lou must have read my mind. Where's this going, Jake? By now we were inching through the tunnel. Bear with me a minute more. I promise you'll know by the time we get to your office, which was in the complex just north of City Hall, about 10 minutes beyond the tunnel. Fine. South Africa? In the early 90s, when petty crime in Joburg was spinning out of control, 3 or 4 young thugs tried to mug an upstanding citizen named J.J. Thurston. He pulled out a handgun and shot 2 of them. One died, the other was paralyzed from the waist down. The courts ruled self-defense. At that point, Lou's light bulb flashed. More literally, we just emerged on the Manhattan side of the tunnel. Oh no, don't tell me. Not that tired old crap about how he didn't die of natural causes. Oh, so that's why you asked me to go to the funeral with you? Come on, Jake, why not get up? And instead of completing the insult, he blew out a long breath. Why had it taken him so long? Maybe because he'd been resisting the idea that his dear old teacher was capable of such inanity. And the excerpt stops there, and then the rest of the story is about what really happened to Jumbo. This story is called On Elizabeth Bishop's One Art. The epigraph is a quote from that poem. The art of losing isn't hard to master. Well, I don't know about that. I mean, I'm good at losing things, but I wouldn't call it an art. To me, the trick, art, is remembering where you lost them. And by things, I mean both things and memories. About a week ago, I thought I left my back support cushion on the subway. It wasn't on the chair where I always put it when I get back to the apartment, so I know where it is. And it wasn't in my backpack, where it always is when I forget to take it out and put it on the chair. I prepared for remedial action. I would call the MTA, and since this wasn't the first time I'd left the cushion somewhere, at work, concerts, movies, I also decided to call the cushion company and order a backup. So I sat down at my desk and kicked the cushion, which had rolled onto the floor. Black cushion, dark brown floor. New rule, always use the strap to loop the cushion onto the back of the chair, but no need to order a backup. This was just a trivial preliminary example. Now for the main event. This one is about memory, the forgetting kind of losing. And it's not just about where, but why. The night before last, I was in a Turkish restaurant in New Haven. I don't live in New Haven, but I won't tell you what I was doing there yet because I don't want to get sidetracked or spoil the story. Although it was a very nice restaurant, I was the only diner, probably because it was so early, about 5:30. As soon as I was offered a table in the front window, I looped the cushion onto the chair. Of all things, the sound system was playing loud recordings of sentimental Italian songs. Although they were instrumental versions, I recognized 2 out of 2 of them. Come Back to Sorrento, or as my late wife used to say, Snorrento, and that other one whose title sounds like Non Dimentica. What could have been more incongruous? Here's this beautiful place, benches, cushions, carpets, lovely Turkish stuff, and they're playing tacky Italian songs. So when the waitress, young, cute, and wearing a tasteful Turkish outfit, came over to take my order, I thought I'd say something. I often say something. What do you have to lose? I never found a pebble in my soup or anything. Hi, young lady, I said. You know, before I order, I have a request. A couple of years ago, I was in Turkey, actually about 10 with my wife, but I decided to simplify. Everywhere I went, I heard wonderful music. You know, in the restaurants and all the other places. She stood there smiling, looking patient. So I wondered, do you happen to have any Turkish music here? Yes, of course, she said with a warm smile. I will change it. She walked off into the back of the restaurant, and 30 seconds later, I got a big surprise. Whereas I'd been hoping for something traditional, some tasteful drumming, say, with a plucked string instrument or two, maybe even some quiet, soulful singing, she replaced the sentimental Italian music with loud, horrible Turkish pop. Of course, I knew better than to ask her to change the music a second time, but that's not exactly the point, which, as I'm sure you remember, is about losing things. After a minute or two, she padded back to my table. Was she wearing sandals, slippers? I didn't notice, but her approach was soundless. Maybe there was a carpet, or maybe it was the loud music. She smiled again and handed me 3 or 4 menus, food, wine, specials, whatnots. Before I even opened the first one, I knew this was going to be expensive. And to anticipate, it was. 43 and change, tax included, plus tip. Which places did you go in Turkey, she asked. I could tell she was being friendly, right? Not trying to catch me if I had lied to get the music changed, and not giving me a quiz to see what a dumb tourist I'd been. This is where the forgetting part happened. Well, my wife and I, stayed in Istanbul a few days, and then we flew down to that big city on the coast. I decided to skip the name, where we rented a car and drove further south. Oh, along the Aegean, suggested the polite young woman. Yes, the Mediterranean too. It was all very beautiful. We had a wonderful time, which was mostly true. She was still standing next to my table, still smiling. It would have made sense to let it go at that and skip to the food ordering. But this is where I finally get back to the point. The art of losing isn't easy. Not even when it's not a matter of losing a loved one, which is the loss with which Bishop ends her poem. See, the poet keeps listing all these things she lost and saying how she managed to cope with each loss, building up to something that wasn't easy, which she loses in the last stanza, her lover. And of course, she didn't have to tell me that losing things, all sorts of things, really can be hard to master. This is sort of the deeper point of the poem, the way she gets the reader ready for the sort of surprise at the end. I hope I've explained that clearly enough. Lately, at least for this reader, any losing, big or small, is hard to master. And I'm not just talking about my obvious loss, the death of my wife. You see, one of the things about losing your memory is that it doesn't happen in isolation. When the furniture starts to rattle around up there, it all rattles, and soon everything starts crashing into everything else. Back to the restaurant. I don't know exactly why I said what I said next. It's possible you will attribute it to the stubbornness of age, which is admittedly one large piece of smashed furniture in my attic. But I think there was more to it than that. We flew to, I tried again, do you know that really big city? It's Antalya, she suggested. No, not that one. It's, and then I blurted out the part that surprised me then and still surprises me now. You know, the one that used to be called Smyrna? The waitress may have shrugged, still smiling. Maybe. I wasn't looking at her anymore. But she didn't provide the new name of the city. I'll give you a few minutes to decide about the food, she said instead. I'll come back and take your order. And once again, she walked off soundlessly toward the kitchen area. Why did I say Smyrna? Most Turks do not like to be reminded of the former name of this, the third largest city in their country. Since I can't assume you know these facts, Smyrna was the Greek name of the city when in 1922, the nationalist Turkish army under Ataturk slaughtered Greeks mostly, maybe as many as 150,000. After that day, the Turks changed the name to, yes, I remember it now, Izmir. Most Turks are still into Smyrna denial. Izmir. If you happen to know Yiddish, a small number of Jews were also killed. There's a saying, Oy vey Izmir, which means, oh, woe is me. Why did I say Smyrna? Why did I forget Izmir? Heaven only knows. Was I subconsciously trying to offend the nice young waitress? Was I making some stupid political point? All I can say is that it was nothing personal. It was me, not her. At any rate, the meal, though expensive, was excellent. No pebbles in the soup. And like most of the people we met in Turkey, the waitress remained polite and pleasant. Was I angry about the music? Maybe so, plus stress from the long day. That's always a good excuse. At last, the why. I'll tell you how I'd spent it now, the day, so you can decide for yourself. In a nursing home with an old friend from college who'd been paralyzed for 5 years ever since a botched brain surgery. Here's one little exchange he and I had that may be related to what happened with the waitress. Remember that funny joke you told the time we were all walking back to the dorm during the big snowstorm? I think it was freshman year. No, I have no memory of that, he replied matter-of-factly, or of anything else. How sad. So I told him his own joke, which involved the expensive funeral of an aunt from Sicily who'd been a miser and worked in a factory most of her adult life. After that, I told him several more of his own jokes, which he laughed at as if they hadn't been his, and as if he were hearing them for the first time. Was that why I couldn't remember the Turkish name for the murdered city? Was that why I rubbed the waitress's face in her own history? Never mind. How can anyone really know about things like that? Maybe I should take a short course in psychoanalysis for the senile. Shall we return to the cushion? I remembered to take it when I left the restaurant. Or perhaps you'd like to hear another of my friend's jokes. The one about a rock collection and rows of cans in the supermarket. That one is really funny. No? Never mind.